Okay, we're now in the book of Exodus, or Shemot, and this is the first Haftarah for that, also called Shemot. So we're going to be in Isaiah 27, 28. So it starts with chapter 27, verse 6, goes to 28, verse 13, and then it jumps ahead to chapter 29, verses 22 and 23. So we have Isaiah addressing both the northern kingdom, Israel, and the southern kingdom, Judah, right? Now, the northern kingdom was conquered and exiled during the time of Isaiah, but this Haftarah, the timing for it was probably like a few decades before that happened. So you know how this Haftarah is in like two sections, right? We have Isaiah 27, 28, and then it jumps all the way to chapter 29, starting at verse 22. Well, I learned something really interesting about this, and I don't think that I've shared it with you before or mentioned to you before, but often the sages would add a few additional lines from whatever book that they were pulling from, and they would do it, they would choose it specifically for verses that contained a message of hope. So the Haftarahs were designed to always end like on a positive and inspirational note, even, and maybe especially when, the prophets in the Haftarah were delivering like a sad or sobering message, which, let's be honest, that's what they've been doing, right? So this idea of leaving, making sure to always leave the Haftarah on a positive note of future redemption, that it actually made me think of something that's this technique that I learned as a parent trainer. So I've worked with foster and adoptive parents and helping them kind of navigate some of the trickier situations of parenting children who've come from trauma, right? So when a parent has, and this works for any parent-child relationship, or any person-on-person relationship. So when someone has some constructive criticism to offer someone, there's this technique that I learned that you can do that kind of makes the listener more ready to hear what you might have to say. Now, as I go through this technique, I want you to think of yourself in the role of the child, when I talk about the child, and God in the role of the parent. Okay, so when I've been working with parents, I often will tell them that of course there's going to be times where you have a breach in your relationship with your child, when the child's behavior is making it really difficult for you to want to connect with them on the same level that you're used to connecting with them. And bringing that up to the child can be a tricky subject, but it needs to be talked about, because what you want to do is stop further damage from happening to the relationship because of the big behaviors of that child, right? So the question becomes, how do I approach talking about some sensitive topic like, hey child, this thing that you do, this is hurting our relationship. Okay? Now, if you're like most of us, the way you want to handle it is, well, this is how I want to fix it, and you need to do ABC to fix it, right? But the problem with this approach is that it doesn't work in the long run. And the reason is that when the parent goes into a situation wanting to fix the child, then the parent's like relational circuits are kind of like offline, if that makes sense. So the parent might be well-meaning and wanting to restore the relationship, but that blunt way, this is your problem and this is what you need to do to fix it, that blunt way kind of ends up creating more distance between the parent and the child. Because from the child's perspective, hearing you need to be fixed doesn't put that child in like the relational frame of mind to truly listen to what that parent is saying to them. Okay. Now, there is a way that we can correct, as a parent, can correct behavior that needs correcting, but still send the message, we are in this together. Okay? And this technique is called the relational sandwich. Because what you do is you sandwich, think of two pieces of bread, two bids for connection between the parent and child, and you put that in between the piece that describes the problem, and that's what I call the meat of the sandwich. Okay, so the first layer, you give an example of what that relationship was and how important that relationship is to you. Then the meat is you address the problem, and then the third one, the bottom part of the sandwich, this is you say how I would like the relationship to be restored. The relationship's worth it, right? So the conversation starts and ends with relationship, and the problem is in the middle. It's sandwiched in the middle, if that makes sense. So here's an example. First piece of bread. I really love how much fun you and I used to have. The meat. It would be great if you would find a way for you to let out your frustrations without saying mean things to me. Then the bottom part of the sandwich, I know you care about me, and I know that we can have fun together again, just like we did before. Okay? That's the relational sandwich, and that's what the image that I have in my mind when I think about how the sages always end their Haftarah on a positive note, a note of future restoration between Israel and God. It's like they're giving us a reminder that God is saying, I know that we can be close again, just like before. Isn't that cool? So the lesson here is that we also can be mindful to add that last part of the sandwich to our conversations with people, but also add it to the end of our day. Like end on a good note, right? That's not positive thinking. It's realistic thinking. Because at the end of the day, no matter how much I've messed up, God still wants that future restoration with me and you, right? And since that's His will, it will happen. So before we get into the Haftarah and the Torah portion connection, I wanted just to go ahead and read the last couple of verses that the sages had picked out for this Haftarah, so you can see that last part of the relational sandwich. Therefore, so says the Lord to the house of Jacob, the one who redeemed Abraham. Jacob, now you will not be ashamed, your face will not blanch now. When he sees his children, my handiwork, in his midst, sanctifying my name, they will sanctify the Holy One of Jacob, and the God of Israel they will glorify. Okay, so now let's talk about the Haftarah in the Torah portion connection. So what ties the Torah portion to the Haftarah is the Hebrew Habaim. And Habaim means the coming ones. So in the Torah portion, it says, these are the names of the sons of Israel who came Habaim to Egypt. And the Haftarah says, this is in the NIV, in the days to come, Habaim, Jacob will take root, Israel will bud and blossom and fill the world with fruit. Now, in the Haftarah, it says, in the days to come, Habaim. It doesn't actually say days in the Hebrew, so it's the coming ones. And one of the commentaries that I read had some really great questions to ask about that. So just who or what is coming? When and where are they going to take root? And then what's represented by that analogy to a plant taking root and blossoming? So if you end up wanting to give this some thought, or you already have given this some thought, let me know in the comment section below in this lesson, because I'd love to hear what you've come up with. Now, some scholars interpret habaim to mean days. So what's coming would then be days. The days are coming. And this then, of course, would refer to the time in the future, redemption, end of the exile. And if you look at the very beginning of chapter 27, so our Haftarah doesn't start till verse 6, but in the very beginning it starts with the words Bayom Hahu, which means on this day. And that phrase, Bayom Hahu, shows up 4 times in the whole chapter 27, and just in this Haftarah it shows up 3 times. There's this really beautiful song with that title, Bayom Hahu. Maybe you've heard it, maybe you know it. Jews will pray 3 times a day, and at the end of their prayers they say, Bayom Hahu, on that day, God will be one, and God's name will be one. So that's kind of cool. Now, also in the Torah portion and the Haftarah, we've got this idea of an increase of people. In the Torah portion, we've got the Israelites settled in Egypt, and they grew at like a supernatural rate, right? And the Haftarah is telling us that Jacob will take root, Israel will bud and blossom, and fill the world with fruit. So another tie-in with the Torah portion and the Haftarah is that they both will hearken back to creation week and that empowerment that God gives, be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. Now, we could totally go to town trying to unpack that, and what is root, bud, blossom, what does fill the earth mean, right? Fill the earth with fruit. We don't have time to go into all of that, but with this also, let me know if you have any thoughts. Put them in the comment section, because I'd love to hear that too. You'll hear me say this over and over again, but it's really, really hard to narrow down these lessons. And I know I'm not always going to cover the things that stood out to you in your readings. And I certainly can't cover all the things that stood out to me and still keep these lessons like even under 30 minutes. So, remember that we're in this for the long haul, this studying and learning. We can learn a little bit at a time, right? So I do want to kind of hone in on Isaiah 28:9. And that is, who can teach knowledge? Who can understand what he hears? Just weaned babies drawn away from the breast. So here's what's going on. Isaiah has this message from God to warn the people about approaching disaster due to things like their drunkenness, their quest for wealth, power, their arrogance, self-centeredness, right? So Isaiah tried to warn them, to point out their behavior that's keeping them from closeness to God, right? So when you think of that relational sandwich, that's the middle meat part of the sandwich, right? The criticism. But the people's cynicism causes them to not hear, to not shema, right? And Isaiah is expressing his frustration at not being able to reach them with the truth, God's truth, his Torah, right? Whom can one teach knowledge? Who can understand what he hears? Just weaned babies drawn away from the breast? So there's a couple of different ways that we can read that. One is sarcasm, which is kind of the way I always read it, right? The other one is actually a genuine answer to the question. Who can understand what he hears? Just weaned babies drawn away from the breast. Okay? So in that way of looking at it, that has a different message for us. That says that even though in the society at large, the Israelite society, even though that's cynical and messed up, and because of that they're not hearing from God, they don't want to understand what God has to say, there's still hope for the children. Perhaps the children have enough innocence and still enough trust in God to be able to hear God's message to them through the prophets. So perhaps the children have qualities that will allow them to embrace God's Torah. Okay? Now, in this one particular commentary that I read, it suggested that Isaiah specifically uses the imagery of a nursing children, a nursing infant. And he does that to make a point that it's necessary for one to be innocent and trust God like a nursing child trusts their mother. And if we were to look at one of David's Psalms, Psalm 131, that uses the same imagery. He's equating a relationship of complete trust in God to himself as a nursing infant. So let me read Psalm 131. A song of descent for David. Lord, my heart did not become conceited, and my eyes did not become haughty, and I did not walk in ways too great or too mighty for me. If I did not liken and compare my soul to a nursing infant with his mother, as a nursing infant was my soul. So what might be the lesson here? Well, think about a nursing infant, or just an infant in general, right? Completely and utterly dependent on her mother to give her everything that she needs, right? There's not one thing that an infant can do for herself. Now, if the mother is able to provide all the needs for the infant, then trust develops and attachment forms. Now, in this particular scenario, we're talking about a mother who does provide all that, okay? And a mother who provides everything for the needy child. That's always been symbolized by this image of a nursing mother. So when you think about it, a mother cradling the infant, nursing, you've got physical nourishment, you have eye contact back and forth. You have the beat of the mother's heart. The baby could feel that. You have this sense of safety and security, right? So by using an image of this nursing mother, the symbol of every need being met, Isaiah is speaking of the only recently weaned infant. So the infant who's only recently weaned, they still retain their ability to trust others to provide for their needs. But they're also able to provide for some of their needs, right? But they still have that ability to trust someone else to provide for their needs. And these are the ones, Isaiah says, who will be able to listen to God's Torah. These are not like those cynical ones, the ones of the northern and the southern kingdom, those people that Isaiah is frustrated with and that God's frustrated with. Now, there's a midrash that I won't go into here, but ask me in the comments if you'd like to hear more about it, because it is really cool. That is where we get the idea of equating nursing being a prerequisite for being able to absorb the Torah. Okay? So Isaiah teaches us that learning and retaining Torah, shemaing, letting the God's wisdom, his instructions, his Torah, letting that penetrate every part of one's life, that has a prerequisite. And that would be a relationship with God that is like a nursing child. Now, if God has proved himself to you time and time again to be a worthy nursing mother, then what's standing in your way from accepting his nurture in certain parts of your own life? Maybe that's the question to prayerfully ponder this week, inspired by this Haftarah. See you next week.